One would have thought that putting in a central banker and a financier in charge of the country would really do well by our finances, but it doesn't seem to be the case at all. Mark Carney, in spite of all of his financial bona fides, Canada's economy is still tanking. Hello, I'm Adrienne Batra. With me are Warren Kinsella, Lorrie Goldstein, and Brian Lilley. Brian, this is not my words. They're not your words. They're the words of the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Jacques, who said that what is happening with our country's finances is unsustainable. And he said so very publicly at committee recently. What did the Parliamentary Budget Officer have to say, Brian?
He called the current fiscal situation stupefying and unsustainable. And when asked by a Liberal MP, I want to play you this clip. One of the Liberal MPs on committee was trying to say, okay, but aren't we doing better than our peers? Which is the Liberal argument. We're still doing better than France or other countries that are more broke. And Jacques, here, he just paused and then had this to say.
It should be very alarming, right? These are, I don't know, I think I used the words in French, and which the translators probably got really well, like stupefying, shocking, right? This is not, like, it's not a funny fiscal outlook. It's a really serious fiscal outlook. And we don't lightly use the word unsustainable. Right?
So, his point is, sure, maybe we're doing better than the guys that are more broke, but that's not a good argument and it doesn't make it more sustainable. Let me put the numbers on this. The Parliamentary Budget Officer estimates that the deficit for the last fiscal year was $51.7 billion. They estimate that the budget deficit for this year will be $68.5 billion. So between last fiscal year and this current fiscal year, that's a 33% increase in the deficit. But wait, there's more. No, not Ginsu knives. There's the news is just worse. The fall economic statement released on December 16th, the one that Chrystia Freeland resigned over because there was too much red ink flowing, the projected budget deficit for this current fiscal year was supposed to be $42 billion. So we've gone from $42 billion to $68.5. That is an incredible increase of more than 60%. And here's a bigger part of the problem. It's not all blamed on Donald Trump. This is a problem of overspending. There's a small portion, about 18%, that is assigned to Trump and the tariffs and the trade uncertainty. But, this is mostly our own overspending.
Lorrie, we've said it many times that Canada's economic failings started way before Donald Trump became president again this year. We had a former prime minister who spent more and increased the debt more than almost every other prime minister collectively in Canadian history. So it's little wonder that we're in this financial situation where we're not going to see any change forthcoming, in spite of what Carney has said. He's told his cabinet ministers we have a mandate to find reductions. We're going to, we hear the civil service already trying to make some noise that there's going to be cuts to the civil service. But this is just beyond reductions in the civil service. Even if they just did, through attrition, that's not nearly enough to have any semblance of order back in our financial books.
Well, the way to measure Carney when this budget comes out on November 4th is, he said during the Liberal leadership race that the economy in Canada was in trouble way before Trump. He made a point of it, and he said it was for two reasons. One was for letting immigration get out of control, and the other was operational spending of the government increasing at 9% a year. Now, what he has said is, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower the operating cost of the government, which is the cost of running the government, the cost of the public service, those kinds of things. He says, I'm going to lower that from an increase of 9% a year to less than 2% a year. And we're going to take all that money and we're going to invest it into infrastructure, capital spending projects, investments. Okay, but that doesn't matter what you call the debt. It's all debt. You can call it spending if it's operating, and you can call it investment if it's infrastructure, but it's all going to be financed by debt. And so what the interim parliamentary budget officer was saying, who in my view should be the permanent budget officer. His predecessor was very good, and he seems to be very good. And what he looked at was he said, okay, as a government, you've always had these fiscal anchors. And the two main ones were that the deficit would be no more than 1% of the gross domestic product, and that the the debt to GDP ratio would go down, right? And so he just did his calculations, which doesn't include all of Carney's promises. It doesn't include the increased spending on defense, because based on what we got, right, you're not going to come close to 1% on the deficit, and your net debt to GDP ratio is going up. And so he said, look, we're not over the cliff yet. He said, but we're standing on the precipice. And if you don't change, this thing of every year things are going in the wrong direction, then you're going to go over the cliff. Now, right now, the government used to say a 27% net debt to GDP ratio is good. Well, now we're over 40, right? Now, what happened was, and the warning is that, for example, in the mid-1990s, the debt got so out of control that the net debt to GDP ratio was 70%. That's when Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin famously had to do something, because we were falling, right? And that was it was a very harsh austerity budget, but it's what the country needed. And what was the effect? Well, what happened was the federal government lowered its transfers to the provinces. The provinces then lowered their support to municipalities. And so what we saw across Canada, because of what had happened and because of the situation, frankly, that the federal Liberal government had inherited, was that public services deteriorated right across the country. That's when the big collapse in things like healthcare started, right? And you remember you had these wars like in Ontario, Mike Harris is cruel, yada, yada, yada. No, the province transferred the debt to Ontario. Ontario put it on. So that was what he was warning about. It's not that we're at the worst situation now, but we could be. And the other thing is that the National Business Council came out and said, look, to the Prime Minister, you've got to have a plan that we see where these deficit numbers are going down and the net GDP are going down. Because if it doesn't, it discourages business investment. And business investment is key to economic growth. Why? Because businesses that believe in the future of a country invest in it. They invest in technology to make the workforce more productive. And that's how you get economic growth. And right now, like the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, we're supposed to have the worst economic growth from now till 2060 if nothing happens. So, and then I've seen some commentary that, oh, well, the people who are saying that the deficit is bad, it could be a political deterrent. It's the wrong thing to say. It's absolutely the right thing to say. We've got to at least get, look, you can't wipe out a $1.5 trillion deficit in a year or two. You can't wipe out the annual deficit. But you've got to get things going in the right direction, and now they're going in the wrong direction.
Well, Warren, Lorrie brought up your old boss, Jacques Chrétien. You were around those tables during those times, and they made very difficult decisions. And they did the provinces and the municipalities always still they did what they had to do, but they always talk about the downloading from the federal government. But what the Liberals inherited was such a fiasco, and had to be done. We're not far off from that right now, Warren.
No, and he used to, there was a cover of The Economist magazine depicting, I think it was a moose on the cover. You guys may remember this, some of you are old like me. And it talked about Canada becoming a third world economic basket case. Yeah. He would carry that magazine around in his briefcase and show it to people and say, this is what we have to deal with, when he was in opposition. So, but I'm from Calgary, and I'm confused as usual about Mark Carney. Because he got elected for two reasons. One was Donald Trump, obviously, but the second reason was because of his economic credentials. So what have we seen from him since he received a mandate from the Canadian people, extraordinary mandate, defeating a party that had been ahead, by nearly 30 points? We've seen him talk about having his elbows up, and he's put his elbows down. We've seen him talk about it being an austerity budget, but he's also going to have investment. We've heard from him that we should tighten our belts, but then he's talking about actually taking an equity share in aluminum and steel companies. So, like, I'm confused. I don't know what this guy, who knows more about economics than I ever will, I don't know what his message is anymore. And that is a potentially lethal political position for him to be in, because that is the main reason why people voted for him and gave him this extraordinary mandate: coherence and clarity on the economy. And we're not seeing any.
Brian, quick last word to you. You know, one of the things that we also heard from the Carney government during the election and beyond was that they're really going to be pushing these national projects, you know, national unity and all of that. But that comes with investments and resources and behind it. We haven't heard anything specifically from the federal government on that. I know they've set up some czar or some office. It's probably going to waste a lot of money, get us nowhere. But Premier Danielle Smith in Alberta, she's saying, you know, I can't sit around and wait for the feds to get their act together. We've got to move forward.
When Mark Carney announced the major projects list and there was no oil pipeline on it, I thought that Danielle Smith would actually be angry. Instead, she told Albertans, like, hey, have patience. And we all thought, okay, well, maybe something's happening. Now she's announced that, well, the Alberta government is going to work with industry, work with Indigenous groups, and start the planning process for a pipeline to the Northwest Coast. Of course, British Columbia Premier David Eby is saying no to that. And Mark Carney is not saying, well, if we want a pipeline, we're going to make one. He's not doing that national thing. But as we've talked about before, his big nation building projects so far have been far too tepid for what we need to turn this around. There, you know, in the face of that deficit that Jason Jacques projected, there's three things you can do. You can cut spending, which they should do. You can increase taxes, probably not the best move. You can grow the economy. And if we grow the economy, that deficit will shrink because government will have more revenue as the economy grows. We're kind of just doing half steps, and that's really not good enough. We'll see what happens with this project from Danielle Smith. Planning, maybe it gets it on the government's agenda, but they really need to start looking at the regulatory environment so that people do want to invest in Canada. And for 10 years, we had a government in place that wanted to stop investment, and they did. They were successful. Mark Carney needs to turn that around. He is, as Warren said, the big economist, the big banker guy, the investment guy. Show us some leadership. You've got the country behind you and willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. Time to act.
Hear, hear.
Well, let's see if the Carney government actually makes Canada an attractive place for people to invest, because right now, that's certainly not the case. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel and go to the TorontoSun.com. You'll find commentary and coverage there you will not find anywhere else.